It's like this. It's like this. It's like this. It's like this.
Hi everybody, it is Friday, October 16th, 2015. This is Radio Tokyo. I'm your host, Jonathan, and Nick is with me, and we have a super special guest who, like last week, I want to introduce first. Our guest today is Todd Jagger. He is the Western States Coordinator for the organization known as Wolf-PAC. Hi Todd, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan and Nick. Thanks for having me.
No problem. It's a pleasure to have you, sir. So tell us a little bit about Wolf-PAC. I mean, I'm sure our viewers know some about it already, but anything you'd like to add specifically?
Sure. Yeah. Well, Wolf-PAC was founded in 2012 by Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks, TYT, the largest online news show in the world. And Cenk founded Wolf-PAC because after covering national politics for, about 19 years, he realized that there really was a Rosetta Stone to the problems and why the problems in this country are not being solved, and that was the issue of money in politics. So Cenk decided to look into how to fix the problem of money in politics. The original vision of Wolf-PAC was actually more like a super PAC, kind of like what Mayday PAC from Larry Lessig is doing, to try and combat money with money. As he did more research, he realized that it actually, we need to amend the Constitution. That's the only way we can preserve and restore free and fair elections, preserve our democracy for future generations. And so when you look at how do you amend the Constitution, well, there's only two ways you can do that. First is through Congress. That's the way it's traditionally been done. But the second way that was put into our framers in case Congress became unresponsive to the will of the people is by the states, through the states. And so that's the way that Wolf-PAC is focusing on getting the amendment to our Constitution is through the state level, where representatives and legislators, senators, and House of Representatives are more responsive to the will of the people. They're more willing to talk to the will of the people. They're closer to the people themselves. The state legislators are who you see when you're in the grocery store or when you get your insurance policy. So that's the way we're working, and Wolf-PAC is active in about 40 states right now. We need 34 states to pass binding resolutions calling for a convention to propose an amendment, and once a convention happens, then it proposes an amendment, then it goes back to the states for ratification, and it requires 3/4 or 38 states to ratify or approve any amendment before it becomes part of the Constitution. So we're active in about 40 states. We have live resolutions in a number of states right now. We've been working in Texas. I was actually one of the very first state leaders in Wolf-PAC. Two legislative sessions now here in Texas, and third time's the charm, right? So that's Wolf-PAC. I mean, I can tell you a little bit about how I got involved with Wolf-PAC, but we can save that for later if you like.
Very cool. John, you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. Okay. Todd, you mentioned getting the amendment passed. Is that like an Article 5 amendment?
Yeah, the U.S. Constitution includes Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution is actually a fairly short article, and it is the part of the Constitution that deals with how amendments are put into the Constitution itself. As I said, there's two ways that it can do it. Either 2/3 of both houses of Congress can write an amendment and approve it through both houses of Congress, 2/3 of each house, and submit it to the states for ratification. Or alternatively, 2/3 of the states can call for a convention to propose an amendment and then again send it to the states for ratification. So really the differences there are who is going to write the amendment. Is it going to be Congress with their 8% approval rating? And I think actually in Texas, the last poll on that was that Congress has a 3% approval rating in Texas. So who's going to write out the amendment? Is it going to be Congress? You know, the people that have attained literally the highest levels of political power in our country by being better than anybody else at gaming the system of money and politics? Or is it going to be the states, people like state legislators that, like I said, you see in the grocery store, that you see at the post office, that you can talk to, that you can go into their, their offices 2 miles or less away from your home? So that we believe that the people of the United States are much more attuned to the problem and how to solve it. They're not living in the Washington, D.C. Beltway bubble. And so that's why we are working through the states to get them to propose the amendment, which then will be sent back to the states for ratification. And one of the important things to remember is that because of this high bar for ratification, only the most reasonable proposals would ever make it through the ratification gauntlet of 38 states. One of the key numbers to remember is 13, because it only takes 13 chambers out of the 50 state legislative bodies in our country to prevent anything from becoming part of the Constitution. So nothing radically left or radically right would ever make it through that. And so all the proposals that are going to be discussed will end up being distilled, into something that works, that is acceptable to the majority of the United States, and actually does what it's intended to without any of the consequences, unintended consequences that people might be afraid of.
Yeah. Oh, just to let you know, I actually do live around the Washington D.C. Beltway bubble, but I completely agree with you that it seems like state legislators are much more likely to get this passed and ratified, and I really hope they do, because money in politics is clearly a very big problem.
It's not just a big problem; it's the first problem.
Oh, yeah,
Let me just tell you a little bit about how I came to be involved with this. You reach a certain age and you start looking back on your family history and stuff, and I come to realize that I've come from a long line of low-level pioneers, you might say. My great-grandfather came over from England. He was a captain in the Union Army and commanded an entire colored troop. That's what they called them back then. It was an entire black battalion, a company of soldiers in the Union Army. My father was the first person in the family to leave the family farm and go to college, and he ended up going to Washington and working, helping to found the Housing and Urban Development Commission there, and then later, before that, he was a state representative from Kansas, and later became a successful businessman here in Texas. I was born in Washington, D.C., and I grew up in Austin. My background
that's kind of the opposite for me. I was actually born in Texas,
really?
and I was born in Texas, and I've grown up around DC.
Cool. So my school and my professional life has always been as a photographer and a musician, kind of in the arts, and also a small business owner. Back in the very early 90s, I decided I wanted to raise my kids in a small town, and so we moved out to a very small town in far west Texas called Fort Davis. It's about 1,000 people, and I opened up a gallery on Main Street, and that was pretty good. I mean, it wasn't I was able to keep the doors open at least, and about that time was when the internet started to become a thing, in the mid 90s, and I realized how important that was going to be for people in rural America and rural Texas. Out where we're in Fort Davis, we're about 3.5 hours from the nearest commercial airport, um, 90 minutes from the nearest even Walmart or something. So I started looking around and I contacted all the big companies like AT&T and Earthlink and AOL and seeing if we could get internet access out here in this part of the world. And they all said, no, unless you got 100,000 potential subscribers, we're not even interested. And I thought, well, hell, I can do that. I'll just do it. And so I started looking at what all it would take to open an internet company, and went to the bank and got a loan for all the equipment. And one day the UPS man dropped a pallet of electronic stuff off at my gallery. I had zero background in technology whatsoever. I knew how to type a letter on a word processor, and that was about it. And so I'm sitting there in the floor of my gallery with all this electronic stuff that I had no earthly idea what to do with. And I sat down and put my head in my lap, and I just like, what have I done? What have I bitten off here? And after I got done with that little pity party, I decided, well, you know what? That bank isn't going to care about whether I know what I'm doing or not. They're going to want that first payment, so I better get busy. And I was smart enough to ask somebody on the local college about 30 miles away if they had anybody that was in computer sciences that wanted a job, and they'd like to come help me, and they did. And so basically I founded the first internet company between San Antonio, well, actually Midland and El Paso. And, and it wasn't because I knew what I was doing, because I didn't. But it was because there was a need, and I said, you know what, somebody's got to do this. Somebody's got to stand up and step up and bring the internet to this part of the world. And, lo and behold, yes, it became a successful company. But I look at a lot of what we're doing with Wolf-PAC in the exact same way, because most of us, myself included, have no experience in political activism or talking to legislators. But we all realize that there's a problem, and it's up to us to stand up and take action to correct the course of this country and fix it. Now, to get back to what you said, I became interested in this topic particularly because of climate change, actually. When I first moved to far west Texas, there was a very consistent and long-term weather patterns. It's a fragile mountain desert ecosystem out here. And in the late 90s, I guess is when we first started seeing it, the patterns started to change a little bit. We went into drought, we had the rains when they weren't supposed to be, and we didn't have them when we were supposed to have them. And then I heard about, the problem of climate change. And I started looking at, well, why isn't this being fixed? And the reason, of course, is because the 3% that believe that climate change is not a problem spend 100 times as much money influencing our legislators as the 97% that understand that it is a problem and we've got to take action to fix it. So if the money is swaying those kinds of issues, and then I started looking at how it's affecting all the other issues, and it doesn't matter whether you're on the left or you're on the right, the money is affecting everything that we care about. So as Lawrence Lessig says, money in politics may not be the most important issue to you personally, but it's the first issue that we must fix collectively in order to get to the conversation on how to fix the other issues that are so important to this country.
See, that's actually one of the reasons that I got involved with Wolfpack as well, and I've mentioned it before, but you and I have kind of a similar reason for getting into it. One of my reasons, well, okay, it first it stems from me studying the Civil War for a number of years. Like I'm pretty familiar with Abraham Lincoln and his policies, and how he was able to use uh, Congress, to pass amendments, and defeat the Confederacy. But my initial point of view was looking at things from the way the South did, and I've always enjoyed the idea, like Robert E. Lee, of saying, that he's not going to fight against people, from his own state. The people who believe that they're doing the right thing. Now, my family fought for the Confederacy. We never owned slaves. Probably never even met a slave, but they fought to defend their homes because that's what they thought was the right thing. And I've always been taught, that that's the best thing you can do is to stand up for what you believe in. And, already having that mindset, listening to the Young Turks and looking at, local news and national news and realizing, that yes, like you said, climate change, yes, that is a big problem. And looking at the fact that people just shrug everything off, and then of course Edward Snowden coming in and saying, that the government's listening to what you're saying, and no one gave a damn. It started to make me angry. It made me really angry, and I thought, I see a problem here, and I'm like you, Todd. I think there's a way to solve it, and I think being vocal and standing up and actually speaking my mind is going to do a lot more than just sitting around and bitching on Facebook or Twitter or whatever.
Absolutely, absolutely. It really is up to us, because if we're not going to do it, who is? We can't wait for Congress to grow a conscience. We can't wait for the Supreme Court to hopefully get somebody else on there that would be a swing vote to reverse some of these decisions. But even if they did, then those decisions could be just as easily overturned. So that's why we're working for a constitutional amendment. And is it going to be hard? Yes, of course it's hard. It's supposed to be hard. But, that's what every generation of Americans has done to bring about a more perfect union. And that's what we're striving for here. And, you talk about getting up and having a voice, and it's really, that's what it boils down to, is everybody individually making a decision that, to quote a famous man, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. So, but rather than sticking your head out the window and throwing your TV out, all we're asking you to do is pick up the telephone and talk to your elected officials. And that's your state elected officials, not the federal ones. We don't care about them. They have their chance. They can propose an amendment any day of the week. And but they're not going to do it because they're entrenched in this corrupt political money system that we have in the way we elect our officials. And it's not horrible on the state level yet, but when you talk to representatives, they say, you know what, but it's coming. We're starting to see so much more out-of-state money flowing in, so much more special interests, and really what we've created here is an unintentional nuclear arms race for who can spend the most money in our electoral process. And it's created it's actually perverted the system of representative government. We have a representative republic, a democratic republic here in the United States, and theoretically we are supposed to choose our elected leaders. But what we have got now is a money primary. And nothing shows this more than the fact of the powers that be, the Democratic Party, not letting Lawrence Lessig in on the debates, giving him a catch-22 as far as, you need to be polling at 1%, but we're not going to include you in any of our polls. So the fact that our candidates are being pre-selected for us shows how damaged, how off-kilter our political system is. The famous Boss Tweed from the New York political machine the most corrupt, and famously corrupt political machine outside of probably Chicago and Richard Daley. But Boss Tweed, his famous quote was, "I don't care who does the electing as long as I get to do the nominating." And that's exactly where we're at right now. We have a pre-selected group of candidates. They get to, the donor class gets to do the nominating, and then we get to choose from who they decide we can choose from.
It's one of the coolest backstories I've ever heard. So you are an awesome guy. As far as the Wolf-PAC's progress is on the state level, have you guys been able to ratify in any of the states so far, or are any of the states very close, or can you tell me more about that?
Sure. And just to get the terminology correct, so basically the way this path works, let me just kind of give you just the rundown of how do you get an amendment through the state level. First, you get somebody to introduce legislation, which is called a binding resolution, in one or both chambers of a state government legislature. The various processes, each state is a little bit different in whether it's, what type of resolution, but basically you get a resolution introduced in your state, and it gets assigned to a committee in the state. You have a public hearing on that, and if it passes out of the committee, then it goes to the floor for a floor vote. And once it passes the floor in the first chamber where it originates, where either the Senate or the House, then it goes over to the other chamber for a vote over there. And if it passes through the second chamber, then boom, you're on the board as one of the 34 states calling for a convention to propose an amendment. Now, once we get to 34...
Just one question. Does the governor need to approve, or is this completely at the legislature level?
That's one of the beauties of this type of legislation. In almost all the states, there are a couple exceptions, but in almost all the states, it is a simple majority, or whatever the rules are for passage. But it's not necessarily a simple majority. But once it passes both chambers, in almost all the states, including Texas, it does not have to be signed by the governor. It becomes in effect. So it's just simply, two chambers. There are a couple of states where it does need to be signed by the governor, and there are a couple of states where it has to be passed by 2/3 in the chambers. But for the most part, in most of the states, it's a simple majority in both houses. So I call that a victory right here in Texas, that we don't need it to go to the governor for signature. Just get it through both chambers, and we're on the board. So, but to answer your question, yes, we've been successful in 4 states. We have 4 out of the 34 thus far in just a little over a year of being active. We have, the first state was Vermont. And as Cenk likes to say, people say, "Oh yeah, little Vermont, always brave little Vermont doing the right thing." But it wasn't as easy as you think. But then people said, "Oh, it's just Vermont. You'll never get a bigger state. You'll never get a large state to pass this." Well, later on that year we passed in California, the biggest state in the union. So then they said, but that's the 2 left coast, East Coast, West Coast, you got that. You'll never get something in the middle of the country. Well, next we got Illinois. The machine, the political machine. It was so great to have that one because Illinois has the reputation of being a somewhat corrupt political machine up there, especially around Chicago. But to have them say, "No, we've got to fix this," and stood up and did that. And then finally, just in, I believe it was, I can't remember exactly when it was, I'm sorry, I can't remember. It was like towards the end of the session last year. But finally we got New Jersey. So that was the last state to pass. We had a couple other states that were halfway through. Connecticut is halfway through. A lot of these legislative processes, the clock just simply ran out on us. And in some of them, we have to start over when the clock runs out, and in some of them, we just pick up where we left off. And Connecticut is one of the ones where we pick up where we left off. New Hampshire is one that the clock ran out on, and we have to start over again. But yeah, so we're looking really good. We've got a number of states that's already filed in right now, and Texas only meets once every 2 years, but some legislatures meet not only either all the time, year round, or they meet once a year for several months.
Really, really cool. So, I mean, idealistically, clearly, if you support Wolf-PAC, if you support getting money out of politics, you'd like this to get done as quickly as possible. But realistically speaking, how long do you think this might take to have a realistic shot at getting passed? A year, 2 year, 5 years? How long do you think?
Well, Cenk famously said on one of the shows when at the beginning of Wolf-PAC, if we're all still doing this in 5 years, I'm going to fire everybody, including myself. So, I mean, we're not in this for the long haul. I will say that, there are groups that have been working on the issues of money in politics and trying to get an amendment through Congress for literally decades. And they're no closer now. In fact, I would argue they're further now than they were 10 years ago. We're not looking to make a career out of this. I mean, we look at ourselves as kind of like the militia that's called in to fight a fight, the farmers that come in off the field to join the battle, and then they go back to their farms. That's the way we look at ourselves. I got other stuff I want to do. I want to start fixing other problems in this country. I got a family. I got a ranch out here in West Texas. We're not looking to spend 7, 8, 10 years working on this. Now, could it take that long? Absolutely, it could. We don't. The first year and that we've been active, we actually exceeded our goals and expectations. Once you get more states on board, the resistance, the opposition will become more active against us, the status quo. So, and really, that is our opposition. Just to back that up, our opposition is not Republicans, is not big money. Well, it is big money, but our opposition is truly the status quo, because they're the ones that want to keep things just the way they are. And we're the ones that are saying we've got to evolve. We've got to restore our representative democracy. So we'll see what happens. That everything changes. It's a completely fluid situation. Honestly, we're finding a lot more Republicans on our side than we originally anticipated, which is great, because they're seeing and they know that the money works against them just as much as it works against the Democrats. And they don't want outside interests coming into their state telling them what to do and spending money in, getting basically a puppet to run against them. A lot of these, one thing that I've really been incredibly impressed with as I've been working in the Texas legislature is the commitment that our state legislators, no matter whether they're Republican or Democrat, have to the people of their district, and that they really care. They're thoughtful people. They're not looking, again, like we always say, they're regular people. They're retired teachers. They're small business owners. They're small-town lawyers. So they are absolutely committed to doing the right thing for their people and their community. And so that's why it's up to us as people in their community to just simply tell them that we want them to do something about this. So we found a lot more support from both sides of the aisle than we actually anticipated when Jenk started this. You know, and the the situation definitely evolves, I guess is what I can say. You know, we were introduced in Texas by a Republican this last session, very, very conservative Republican, I might add. And we had both Republican and Democratic co-sponsors on the issue, on the bill. So there's no question that we have much greater support across the aisle than we anticipated. We had a majority of Republicans vote for it in New Hampshire, a majority of Republicans vote for it in Missouri, you know, red state Missouri. And so it's just going to, I think it's just going to take, there's no way to predict how long it's going to take. But we are definitely encouraged in how things are working out. And, you know, but we do have to be committed to doing this for the long run, because what the status quo counts on is us getting tired and us saying, okay, well, it's too hard. I don't want to do it. You know, I can't, you know, and even when it comes down to the macro level of talking to your own legislator, you know, they count on you, you know, if they're not necessarily pushing for to support the legislation or the legislation to move forward, they're counting on people just giving up and not being perseverant. But you know what? When we are perseverant and when we are polite and respectful, that earns the confidence and builds our reputation in the State House. One of the legislative directors for a very prominent Texas legislator told me one of what I consider like the best compliment that she could give our organization and our people in our organization in Texas. She said, you know, Todd, I just got to say about your Wolf-PAC about the Wolf-PAC, that your volunteers have just the right combination of knowledge, passion, and respect and perseverance. You know, we're consistently there. We don't badger, we don't accuse, but we're there. We're coming, and we're going to keep coming because we're always getting stronger, and that's what it's going to take to turn the tide and make this success. So if you want to join us, wolf-pac.com, P-A-C, www.wolf, W-O-L-F, -PAC.com.
I might have to go sign up. John's been trying to. John, I'm echoing again. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, John's been trying to get me to sign up for a while. And I'm tempted to. I do think I really like what I hear from Wolf-PAC. I'm definitely a supporter.
Actually, that's where you should be. It really, you know. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, you've mentioned the name a couple times now, Lawrence Lessig. I'm semi-familiar. Like I've listened to some of what he said, you know, so I know who he is, and I know he was not allowed at the debate on Tuesday, whatever it was this week for the Democratic Party debate. But my question is, like, to you, well, okay, well, first off, for those of you who don't know, and Todd can probably explain this better than I can, Larry Lessig is running on the single issue of getting money out of politics. And to me, I think that might be why he was not allowed, because that's, you know, like you said, that is the number one issue, you know, that needs to be solved before you can get everything else accomplished, it seems. And maybe he's a little too scary to the establishment politicians, and that might be why they said, oh, we're not going to let him be on, even though, you know, he met the only requirement, which was polling at 1%. But my question is, do you think that he has a fair and decent chance compared to individuals like Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, and whatnot? And of course, you know, I know as far as Wolf-PAC goes, we're focused at state level, but since he's one of the few candidates that's actually, you know, essentially championing what Wolfpack stands for, do you think that he has a serious chance? Like, is there enough people who are angry enough about this that they would say, you know what, everything else can wait. I'm going to put all my trust in this one person.
Well, I'm not in the business of making political predictions. Obviously, if he's not included in polls and he's not included in debates, that's pretty much would make it almost impossible for him to attain any kind of momentum in order to be a viable candidate. Honestly, I have not. Obviously, I like Larry Lessig and I support his candidacy. Larry has been incredibly helpful to Wolfpack. He has testified for us at committee hearings. We have a really good relationship with Lessig and his campaign, but I'm not really. I've got my hands full, so I don't really keep my finger on the pulse of what's going on with that. As far as whether he's viable or not, obviously he's viable. He, but I think that his idea of a referendum candidacy is so foreign to what people are here have experienced in the past that it's hard to wrap their head around. And unless he gets the platform to explain it and how it would work and how, what he wants to do, who the vice president would be that would take over, that kind of stuff, I think that it is such a foreign concept that it's really, really difficult. He's definitely got a hard road. I don't think that anybody anticipated the Democratic Party not allowing him to participate. I think that was a real surprise to Lessig and his campaign. And so, what does he do now? How do you get that out there? So it's going to be really interesting to watch. And but I do think that the Democratic Party is hurting themselves by doing this. I mean, there's 14 people up on the Republican stage, several of whom nobody's ever heard of before. And here's a guy, Larry Lessig, who has a TED Talk that is probably in the top 10 viewed TED Talks online. Millions and millions of people know who he is. He's got bona fides and credentials out the wazoo. He's a tenured Harvard law professor, head of the SAFRA ethics chair at Harvard. He was a Supreme Court clerk for Antonin Scalia. He was a delegate to the Republican convention for Ronald Reagan. So I mean, he's not somebody that is a lightweight in this sphere. So I think that unless the Democrat Party gets their stuff together and allows an open and honest conversation about what's going on, then they're really painting themselves into a corner. Is this a democracy or is this a oligarchy?
To add to what you were saying, and in response to what John was asking, I think that part of Lessig's problem is that he is a referendum candidate, and essentially, if you're a voter at that point, at least from my perspective, I'm voting for two people then, much more so than a traditional presidential candidate, because I know at the end of the day that once Lessig does what he says he's going to do, then the vice president's going to take over. So essentially, I'm not only voting for Lessig at that point, I'm voting directly for the vice president. Obviously, you do that with traditional presidents as well, but it's not under the assumption that the vice president is certainly going to take over at some point. I like what Lessig has to say, but it certainly makes me question whether I would actually go to vote for him, even though I do completely agree that money has to come out of politics. Um, at least that's my perspective.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I understand that, and that's, those are the questions that people can and need to ask and should ask. Um, I think that Lessig anticipated having a platform on which to answer those questions, and I think he's done that quite a bit on his site, and doing YouTube videos and things like that. But it really, that's not enough. There needs to be a more widespread mainstream communications vehicle for him to,
Oh,
share his vision and how it would all work. And I agree. I agree. I mean, these are hard questions that need to be answered.
See, what bothers me is at the debate, and I'm just going to go ahead and read it. All of us watched the debate, so we know that the first candidate to directly mention it was Bernie Sanders. But this is what he said in his opening remarks. The middle class in this country for the last 40 years has been disappearing. Millions of Americans are working longer hours for lower wages, and yet almost all the new income and wealth being created is going to the top 1%. That's from his opening remarks. And it wasn't as if every other candidate up there, was completely avoiding discussing the idea of dark money in politics and how it's corrupting, our democracy. And to me, like that being, the one reason, the one thing that Mr. Lessig is wanting to, wanting to talk about and change and everything. And, like I said a few minutes ago, that could be the reason he was told no. If that's the reason he's told no, then that is bullshit. It really is. He ought to have been allowed to be up there because, like I said, the minimum uh, requirement was polling at 1%, and then all of a sudden he's dropped from the polls, which is not unusual, particularly for CNN to have done that. Because I don't know if you're familiar with it, but after they did the audience polls and the focus groups and everything, they showed that the winner of the debate among the people was Bernie Sanders, but the establishment has already picked Hillary Clinton, to be, the go-to winner. And it's just and there was a poll that came out this morning that's now showing that it's now reflecting that, because that's what you're hearing in the news media. So maybe this is some kind of media conspiracy to keep him from the public eye.
I think that uh, I think part of the problem is when you try to go against the establishment, um, or just directly against the establishment, like Mr. Lessig is trying to do, is that to some degree you have to work within the framework of the establishment in order to get your foot in the door. And I think perhaps maybe the biggest problem he has is um, the idea of being a referendum candidate, and it's just like you were saying, Todd. It's just so foreign to people that I I think if he had just tried to run as a normal presidential candidate, I think he would have had a much better shot of getting in um, to the national media stage that he needs in order to promote his ideas.
Right. I understand that, and I wouldn't want to put any kind of, I don't know how he thinks about, this would work and all that. I know he did announce that concept, and back in March of last year at South by Southwest in Austin, that's where he unveiled this idea of a referendum candidacy, and he didn't want to do it. He didn't want to be that candidate, but he ended up actually kind of getting talked into it by the people of the country, by his followers and things. So, it's an interesting situation. But just to hop on to something that Jonathan said there. So of all the $1 billion that each party is going to raise and spend in this upcoming election cycle for the presidency, where does that get spent? Well, TV ads, right? So it's no surprise that the National Association of Broadcasters and the mega corporations, the 5 media corporations that we have in this country, who are also, in some cases, happen to be defense contractors, it's no surprise that they're going to suppress and divert attention from something that's going to, something that is so critical to their bottom line. I mean, it's just blatant self-interest.
Oh, definitely. There's no question about it.
Yep.
Oh, there was one more thing I wanted to ask you, Todd. How long has we been going, John?
What's that?
How long have we been going on now?
We're a little shy from the hour mark. We're about 10 minutes away from it.
I just had one more question for Todd, if that's okay, Todd.
Absolutely.
You said that Wolf-PAC was currently involved in 40 states, if I remember right.
Right. We're active in about 40 states, yes.
Do you know what the 10 states that you're not active in and why? And do you guys have any plans to become active in them?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I don't know off the top of my head the states, and in fact, that's just kind of a number that honestly I don't know that it's, it might be 38, it might be 43, I don't know. But, about 40 states.
About 10. About 10.
Yeah.
About 40.
But the only reason why we're not active in particular states is that we just don't have a state leader there in those states. Somebody, and so we're actually working on that right now of processing volunteers and bringing volunteers into the fold, helping them become organizers, looking for the ones that would be interested in becoming a state leader. It's really hard to get something going in a state if you don't have much of an organization there. Volunteers that are willing to make phone calls, somebody that's willing and interested in kind of taking the lead and coordinating things with the volunteers there. So that's the only reason why we're not active. It's not some sort of political calculation or whatever. It just happens to be the states where we have more of an active organization, things going forward, that kind of stuff. Like, for example, Alaska. I mean, we've got volunteers up there, but there's really nobody on the ground that's kind of coordinating things. Wyoming would be another example of that. Idaho. Let's see, what else? Yeah, like South Dakota, North Dakota. Sparsely populated states that may not have a large volunteer base to draw from in the first place. But whereas, states like, I mean, we're super active in a lot of the Midwest states right now. We've got a great organization in Texas. Even some of the smaller southern states like Tennessee and the Carolinas and Georgia, we're active in those states as well.
Very cool. So, if anyone's listening out there that's in one of those states, try and get Wolf-PAC active out there. Contact them, see what you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. Really, no matter what, get active with your team in Wolf-PAC. We're all about action. We're not, as Jink likes to say, get off the couch and do something, right? So that's the whole idea. Is we actually are focused on action, and blessedly, actions that we need to take are super simple. I mean, it's literally just, literally just talking to people, talking to legislators specifically, because they're the ones that can vote for this and pass it through the state. It's funny when I go up to the Capitol and I'm walking around there and I see people. I was up there enough last session that people recognize me and they know who I am and what we're doing. And along with a pretty good handful, a group of volunteers that either live close enough to Austin or in Austin or have traveled to Austin to become to be a part, to come see. Some volunteers will come down from Dallas or up from San Antonio or over from Houston, to spend a day at the Capitol and talk to people. And so when they ask me, "Hey, Todd, what you doing?" Well, I'm saving democracy one conversation at a time, because that's literally what we do. All it is conversations. You're just talking, you're telling people what you want, telling people why it's important.
Well, everybody, we certainly appreciate you tuning in and listening to our interview with Mr. Jagger. But unfortunately, you may have noticed the slight cut there. The audio, again, this week cut off like it did last week. So Nick and I are back to, kind of close the show. That way it doesn't just drop off. I actually don't know what's going on and what's causing it. But I just have to go ahead and say that joining up with Wolf-PAC and helping out has given me a lot of confidence. I feel a lot better about myself, and I feel really good standing up and speaking out about something. And as most of you know, Nick and I joke back and forth about, me being Batman, him being Spider-Man, and I think this is probably the most Batman thing I have ever done in my life.
But wouldn't you be Wolfman?
Probably would have to be Wolfman, but I would have to change my costume, and it gets expensive.
Well, I mean, that's the price you have to pay.
It is the price. I mean, justice does have a price, and hopefully that price is not money in politics. Ah,
Yes, it's the price of our costumes when we go out, not in the politicians' pockets.
that's true. That's true. We all need more um, superhero costumes. But anyway, just a slight reminder that I completely forgot earlier when we originally did this. I have no idea how many of you are fans of Bill Maher, but here, about an hour or so from now, he'll be on, and he'll actually have on Bernie Sanders, and and bonus day, Larry Lessig will be on the show. So if you are interested in hearing what Mr. Lessig has to say, this is a good opportunity for you to tune in, see him, hear him, and maybe get a better idea than what we were able to cover on the show. But that's really going to be it, So thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing. Like this video, comment on it, share it on all your social media platforms. It's very important that all of us stand up and speak out, and get our country back. I mean, it's been too long since the citizens have not been able to have their say. So it's time for all of us, to put on our Batman costumes or Spider-Man or whoever you want to be. Get out there and
Wolfman.
make a difference.
We are wolfmen and wolfwomen, and yeah, let's go. Let's get out there. Let's do something. I mean, this is a problem that we can, so let's fix it.
Like Cenk Uygur likes to say, wolf-pack.com. Go!
Alright, everybody. Have a great night.
Yep. Talk to all of you Monday. Remember to like us on Facebook and go to Wolf-PAC. Bye, everybody.
Bye.